we're going to hear from Mary Bunting and Chris Osby Sneed. And just so you know, David Osborne said to me, oh, Hampton has been on the front lines on so many issues in so many ways for at least 20 years. So it's great to have you back.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Mary Bunting, and I became the Hampton City Manager in 2010 as the housing decline crippled revenues. In my first months, I realized we were going to have to make significant budget cuts. And I didn't want to do it alone, because I knew that every service had a constituency, and any cuts would not be well received. Hampton had a strong tradition of community involvement, so it was natural to turn to that process to get input.
Hi, I'm Chris Sneed. I was the budget director then, and I didn't think it would work. We had tried on many occasions to get citizens out to give input on our capital improvement project. I thought it would be an exercise in frustration for a small staff already working long hours.
The typical budget process is reactive. The manager recommends a budget. The residents who don't like it show up and protest. So council's wanting to be responsive, restore the programs, and cut others, except for there's no time for people to react to that second round of cuts. So they typically get approved regardless of whether they were the best choices. I wanted to change this. I wanted to put the input on the front end instead, so we could make sure we made the best possible decisions, and the council could know that they were getting input from the entire community, not just those who were unhappy with the first round of cuts. We wanted to frame this as a discussion about outcomes, what services we valued as a community, and build a body of evidence for those choices. We called it I Value, and we went everywhere. To neighborhood associations, civic organizations, the YMCA, coffee shops, online chats, PTAs, you get the picture.
It worked because we went to the people instead of the people coming to us. We used keypad polling technology for the larger meetings, and residents really liked it because it was anonymous. They didn't have to voice their opinions at all out loud. Plus, everyone gave their views on every topic, not just their pet issues. We could hear moderate views and not just the loudest voices. Over 1,000 people participated in some form. The keypad technology also enabled a different conversation. Many people believe that everyone sees the world the way they do. But when the instant polling results appeared on the screen, they realized that their neighbors had different views. That forced new understandings.
Now, staff was worried that citizens wouldn't make good choices, but it turned out that there were only 2 areas where citizens and staff disagreed. For example, we had been prepared to recommend scaling back library hours, but the public saw the library as an absolute need, so we looked elsewhere. The budget I ultimately proposed balanced $20 million of a gap, yet passed with little opposition, even from those who ultimately had their services cut. The next year, we polled on whether remaining services should be maintained, reduced, or eliminated, and added online polling that mirrored the keypad polling. Participation grew by 27%. In the third year of the housing decline, more cuts were needed, so we started asking about the willingness to raise taxes. Our department had submitted their potential cuts, and we took those specific cuts to the public for them to say whether they could live with the cuts or not. Frankly, residents didn't support many more cuts, and we heard a willingness to consider a tax rate increase. However, it was also an election year, so we did what we could and continued to streamline.
I had retired and was one of the people elected to city council that spring. By the next year, it was clear to council that we couldn't cut our way out of this budget situation. In addition, our school system had been hit with a double whammy, declining local revenues as well as state cuts. It could have been an ugly battle with the school board and the city fighting each other in a public arena over limited funds.
Instead, we worked together with a joint effort by both elected bodies and staffs. We showed residents the cuts we had both made as well as the operating efficiencies we had achieved, but we also showed them how much their tax bills had dropped due to the residential real estate value decline. We did this neighborhood by neighborhood with charts. The school superintendent and I introduced that year's I Value polling theme. Do you want to continue to divest in services and programs for no tax increase, or do you want to protect programs with an increase in the property tax rate or invest in the future with a larger increase? Participation skyrocketed. Nearly 5,000 people were involved.
That's a lot. I won office with about 7,000 votes. The technology is what allows this to work. If those 5,000 people had each spoken 3 minutes at a public hearing, we'd have been stuck in council chambers night and day for nearly 10 days. But the truth is that without I Value, we probably never would have heard from that many people.
Of everyone who participated, nearly 90% supported raising the tax rate, even by substantial amounts. Knowing this community support existed before we finalized our budget enabled the superintendent and I to propose budgets that not only protected services but invested in strategic priorities like a one-to-one laptop initiative for middle and high school students.
Trust me, when citizens in Hampton do not approve, they come out in droves. Instead, almost all of those who did come to the traditional council hearings supported the increase. We approved a 20-cent, almost 20% increase in the tax rate for homeowners, and every one of us who voted for that tax increase got reelected in a citywide election, at-large election. If not for the I Value framework and technology, it wouldn't have happened. I Value is a paradigm shift in the way we do business. It resonates through everything we do now, whether it's the consideration of a capital improvement project, such as an aquatic center, or considering animal tethering. Involving public upfront before budgets are released or decisions make it the traditional public hearing phase increases acceptance for decisions even when residents don't personally agree.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Very good.
Well, can I ask you, I thought it was so interesting how, you did this process and people for a couple of years just accepted the reductions in services. And then at one point they changed their mind and they actually not only wanted to not accept the reduction in services, they wanted new services. In fact, they wanted a swimming pool. So what do you think happened?
Well, I think the issue is involving the public upfront and the trade-offs and giving them, building trust over time with transparent conversations, having them go through the struggles that staff and elected officials go through builds understanding. And so everyone thinks there's fat and waste and they can cut without having to sacrifice anything, but when they're forced to wrestle with those decisions themselves, they realize that's a myth. It's not reality. And so then they weigh, as a community, what is most important to them. And so that's really the innovation here, is involving people up front, trusting that they're smart enough that when given the right data and the context, that they will make the right decisions for the community.
Thank you. Pete?
So I've consulted with dozens of cities in California around public budgeting projects, and one of the things I've learned is that there can be a real distinction in how electeds and staff view public engagement, especially around budgets. Chris, you served both on staff and as elected, and obviously you, Mary, have served on the administrative side. Could you talk a little bit about the changing dynamic of first how council and staff view public engagement around budgets? Just to be clear about it, my understanding has always been that staff sees the public as a nuisance and elected see the public as someone to be steered towards the ballot box to vote for them, right? But these are much tougher decisions, and like you're saying, you're trying to move the public towards making nuanced trade-off decisions. So the culture change that needs to happen both between electeds and staff and even just within the staff side.
Well, I'll just start off and then let Chris give you her perspective, having done both roles. I really saw it as my job as manager to build a body of evidence for council. When I knew we had to cut $20 million, I knew anything I proposed was going to go through that typical process. Someone's going to say, no, those aren't the right cuts. Even if we use really great analytics about return on investment and number of people impacted in the whole 9 yards. And I was setting the council up to be crucified, frankly, with having to cut that much money. So my thought was, let me help council by getting ahead and building that larger body of evidence about what the larger community really wanted. Because we typically only hear in a public hearing from the people who are against something,
Right.
not the people who are for it. So I tried to convince staff that this was going to help staff in the long run, because we would be able to provide the analytics that would make sense and help citizens and the council make the right decisions without having adverse unintended consequences. And I thought that would help the council in their jobs too, so that they can have a better sense of the true community feel.
And as a staff person, when I was the budget director, like I said, I was totally against it. We had tried many times to get citizen input into our budgeting process. We would attend meetings and only 2 people would come. And that's where I think the idea of being anonymous and not having to be able to get up and say anything but to vote on things really brought people together. And it let them be able to have their voice without their neighbor knowing how they really felt about a situation. Once I became an elected official, I really valued that program because, for instance, we just passed an increase on RVs. At first, we had no RV taxes. And we used the polling process to do that. And 85% of the residents said, yes, we would love to have some type of tax on RVs. We had already done it on boats. And so if we had really hadn't used that technology or that program, we would have only heard from those people who owned RVs and didn't want the tax. So it's very helpful.
Linda?
So maybe following up on that a little bit, the anonymity piece actually worried me a little bit when you said it, because what I'm curious about is to what extent has this brought forward people who don't normally participate, and particularly what can you tell us about underrepresented communities, and has it posed any issue where the vocal community actually has gotten more vocal because of access to technology or just network and advocacy and figuring out how to get all their friends to hammer on the website?
Yeah, well, I will say, I think that was a fear, but it hasn't borne out. Particularly in the in-person polling, where you can see the immediate results, it enables people, particularly those in a minority on an issue, I don't mean demographic minorities, but to see that there are other people who think differently than them. And what we hear from what you'd call the silent majority is a lot of times they don't want to come to a meeting and be badgered into submission by a vocal minority. And so the anonymity allows people to come and feel like they can express their opinions. The opinions get immediately displayed on the screen after each question, so they get to give their input but not have to face this animosity. Now, after that, we do have an open discussion, so people can explore these differences and talk through those kinds of things. In the online polling, I will say there is the potential for someone to do that, but because we're doing so many other things, we're going to other groups. When we go to other groups, whether it's a PTA or neighborhood civic association, we take very clear notes. We take a recorder with us. They take notes. We print it out. We say, is this what you want posted on the website? That neighborhood civic organization says, yes, that's what we want. We put it out there. So the people who might try to organize a movement know that we're going to so many other places and that we're being transparent in the data that we're providing, that you've got to manipulate all of those places, not just one space. The one space that they have the potential to do that potentially is on the online polling, but council looks at the balance of all of the input sources.
So, as my colleague here, Kathleen said, your city has been known for 30 years as very, very innovative, and you've built a special culture and you've built a special relationship with citizens. I think citizen trust in government, in local government in Hampton is probably pretty high. You do an annual survey, you get a lot of feedback, you created neighborhood strategies, on and on. So could other cities which don't have that culture make this work as well? Or is this something that requires something special in Hampton?
I think it's absolutely replicable elsewhere. First, let me say, we are unique that we have a longstanding organizational commitment to engagement. That's true. But we are a very transient community. We have Langley Air Force Base in our community, which means that military personnel are moving in and moving out all of the time. We have Hampton University. We have students coming in and out all the time. So not every citizen starts with that place of automatic trust. But as an example, since we were able to show success and show that residents can come to make those trade-off decisions, 2 other localities in our region, Norfolk and Portsmouth, have adopted proactive citizen input on budget. And they don't have the same cultural heritage that perhaps Hampton has. Now, that's not to say they haven't done other engagement efforts, but my point is that, yes, the culture helps. I would not have thought about it, frankly, if it weren't for our culture. I went back to a place I was comfortable with. But there's a transient enough nature of our community. We have a lot of baby boomers who've retired. We've brought in new staff. That I think this is eminently replicable. And the great news is it's cheap. It doesn't take a lot of money to buy the polling technology, and it doesn't cost anything in terms of money to go to people where they're at, which was really where we got the increase in participation, was by not expecting people to come to us, but by going to coffee shops or PTA meetings or the YMCA. Anybody can do that if they're willing to invest the time.
And we continue to do that constantly. We have our economic development director. He's out there talking about our various programs and the objectives and how it's so important to invest in economic development so that we can then increase our tax base. We have so many of our department heads going out to civic meetings and the like, just talking basically about some of the issues facing our city. Our city manager this year did a Budget 101 as one of the meetings that we had for our citizens on the budget so that they could understand how revenues work and how expenditures, what the expenditure drivers were. And by doing that and being transparent, it makes it a lot easier.
Well, do you have another? Well, I wanted to say thank you so much because it really is an inspiration to see what you've done. I think your story of getting citizens involved, getting them engaged, and getting them to agree to raise taxes on themselves in order to do something for themselves is really terrific. So bravo to you. Thank you very, very much.